There's a photo of Maureen McCormick that millions remember. Golden hair, sparkling smile, perfect posture. To America, she was Marcia Brady, the dream daughter, the girl who never did anything wrong. But if you look closely, really closely, behind that flawless smile, you'll see something else. A flicker of pain. A secret that no one in the audience, not even her castmates, dared to ask about. Because while America was laughing with the Bradys, Maureen was crying alone in a bathroom just off stage. Behind the studio lights and family-friendly scripts, her life was collapsing piece by piece. Her father's voice haunted her, her mother's mind was slipping away, and the little girl who once loved the camera had started to hate what it captured. The tabloids called her Hollywood's fallen angel, but they didn't know the half of it. What Maureen lived through, the betrayals, the addictions, the lost roles, the truth behind those private photos was darker than any Brady storyline could ever show, and yet she survived. This is not the story of a sitcom princess. It's the story of a woman who broke, bled, and rebuilt herself in a world that never forgave her for growing up. Stay until the end, because when you see the real photos of Maureen McCormick and what they reveal, you'll never look at that perfect Brady smile the same way again. Long before the world knew her as Marcia Brady, Maureen McCormick was just a shy little girl growing up under the blazing California sun, the youngest of four, chasing dreams she didn't even know she had. Her story didn't begin with fame. It began with a stage and a smile that seemed to hypnotize everyone around her. At just 6 years old, Maureen entered a local beauty pageant, a tiny moment that would rewrite the rest of her life. Cameras flashed, judges beamed, and that innocent smile won first place. It was supposed to be harmless fun, but that moment caught the attention of talent scouts who saw not a child but a product, a brand, a future face of American television. Soon auditions replaced playgrounds, lines replaced lullabies. She was starring in commercials for Barbie dolls and breakfast cereals, the kind of sugary worlds that always ended in a perfect smile. But even then, behind those bright studio lights, a pattern was forming. The world didn't want Maureen. It wanted Marcia before Marcia even existed. A flawless, obedient version of girlhood that never complained, never cracked, never cried. Her parents, proud and hopeful, watched as Hollywood slowly opened its gates. But with every casting call came pressure to look right, act right, be right. Childhood was no longer a phase, it was a performance. By the time she landed guest roles on TV shows like Bewitched and My Three Sons, Maureen wasn't a little girl anymore. She was a professional, trained to smile on command, to hide exhaustion, to stay perfect even when her stomach hurt or her eyes burned with tears. And in those moments when the cameras stopped rolling and silence filled the studio, she started wondering who she really was underneath all that makeup and praise. Was she Maureen, or just a reflection of what everyone wanted her to be? Hollywood was already molding her, sanding down her edges, polishing her personality, and turning her into something marketable. She didn't know it yet, but that innocent smile was her ticket into a machine that would one day consume her completely. Because for every child star that Hollywood crowns, it quietly buries another beneath the weight of its expectations. And Maureen McCormick, America's next Golden Girl, was already standing in line. But her big break wasn't just coming, it was about to define her forever. When Maureen McCormick walked onto the set of the Brady Bunch for the first time, she wasn't just stepping into a role, she was stepping into a dream that millions would soon project their own lives onto. At only 12 years old, she became America's living definition of perfection. Marcia Brady, the blonde, confident, impossibly put-together daughter every family wished they had. The studio lights hit her like sunshine, and suddenly, she wasn't a little girl from the valley anymore. She was a national symbol. Kids copied her hair, teens mimicked her laugh, and magazines called her America's sweetheart. Every episode cemented that image a little deeper, until the lines between Maureen and Marcia began to blur, but the cameras never showed what came after cut. Behind those pastel sets and cheerful one-liners, Maureen often sat alone in her dressing room, suffocating under the weight of everyone's expectations. She wasn't allowed to grow up naturally. Every pimple, every insecurity, every change in her body felt like a flaw in a living doll. The pressure to stay perfect was relentless. Tension simmered behind the scenes too. Co-star Eve Plum, the actress who played Jan, reportedly clashed with Maureen as teenage jealousy mixed with on-screen rivalry. The tabloids exaggerated every look and whisper, feeding the illusion that the Bradys were flawless on camera and fractured off it. Still, Maureen pushed forward, smiling through exhaustion, determined to stay the good girl everyone adored. She didn't know it yet, but the price of that image was steep, and she was already paying it in silence. Because while the world cheered for Marcia Brady, Maureen McCormick was slowly disappearing behind her own reflection. From the outside, the Brady Bunch looked like the definition of harmony, 6 smiling kids, 2 loving parents, and a dog that never barked out of turn. But behind those cheerful pastel walls, a very different story was unfolding. What viewers didn't see was the tension, the pressure, and the quiet heartbreak simmering just beyond the camera's frame. The cast had become a second family for Maureen, but one where every emotion was amplified under fluorescent lights. Long shooting days blurred into endless retakes, and even the smallest mistake felt like a personal failure. When the director called action, she had to lock her real self away and summon the bright, perfect Marcia everyone expected. But the truth was, Maureen was starting to crack. Then one day, fiction collided with reality in a way no one could have scripted. During a car accident offset, Maureen's nose was injured, a moment that would end up rewritten as comedy. In an episode where Marcia's face gets hit by a football, America laughed. Maureen didn't. What was pain for her became entertainment for everyone else. Meanwhile, the innocence of the Brady household was slowly fading. Crushes formed between cast members. Rumors spread. Puberty, jealousy, and fame brewed a cocktail of confusion. The perfect TV family was held together by editing, not emotion. And while audiences tuned in for wholesome lessons, Maureen was silently learning her own, that the world only loved her when she was pretending. The family everyone admired had become a mirage, beautiful from afar, but hollow when touched. When the Brady Bunch ended, Maureen McCormick's world went silent. For years, the laughter track had been her heartbeat. Now it was gone. The phone stopped ringing, the cameras stopped rolling, and the applause that once filled her days vanished overnight. For the first time since childhood, she was alone, and she didn't know who to be without the spotlight. Hollywood moved on quickly, as it always does. Casting agents saw her as a relic of the past, too famous to start fresh, too typecast to transform. The perfection that once made her a star now trapped her inside a role she could never escape, and in that empty space, darkness crept in. Maureen turned to the Los Angeles party scene. Bright lights, loud music, endless faces promising escape. The little girl who once drank orange soda on set was now drowning her pain in lines of white powder and the false warmth of strangers. Each night blurred into the next, each morning filled with regret and numbness. But the addiction wasn't her only secret. At home, she faced demons that never made it into the tabloids, a family scarred by mental illness, her mother's instability, her brother's illness, and a father whose control suffocated every breath of independence. She carried guilt, confusion, and shame that fame had only buried, not healed. She lost roles, she lost trust, she lost herself. A chance to audition for Raiders of the Lost Ark slipped through her fingers when she didn't show up. Another missed call, another dream gone. By her 20s, the golden girl of television had become another Hollywood ghost, haunted by what she'd been, terrified of what she'd become. Just when Maureen McCormick seemed lost to her own chaos, someone unexpected walked into her life. Not a producer, not a fan, but a man who saw through the broken pieces and loved the woman behind them. His name was Michael Cummings, a young actor with quiet strength and eyes that didn't look at her like a former star. He saw Maureen, not Marcia, and for the first time in years, she didn't have to perform. Their meeting wasn't dramatic, no flashing lights or grand gestures, just two people colliding at the right time. But for Maureen, it felt like a lifeline. Michael didn't try to fix her, he didn't chase her fame, he simply stood by her, even when she stumbled. Even when the world turned away. That kind of loyalty was foreign to her, and it terrified her as much as it healed her. Recovery wasn't instant. Addiction doesn't vanish with love. It wrestles, claws, and fights. There were relapses, therapy sessions that ended in tears, and nights when Maureen didn't believe she deserved happiness. But Michael stayed, not out of pity, but out of faith. His presence became a mirror, reflecting the strength she thought she'd lost. Slowly, she began to rebuild. She learned to speak honestly about her pain instead of burying it. She found solace in small victories, a sober day, a shared laugh, a quiet morning without regret. The woman who once depended on the spotlight began to depend on something deeper, truth. For Maureen McCormick, love wasn't just romance. It was rescue. It was the moment she stopped running from herself and started walking toward the life she'd always deserved. Even after Maureen McCormick began to heal, the ghost of Marcia Brady refused to fade. Everywhere she went, it followed her, smiling from reruns, staring from magazine covers, echoing through interviews that always began with the same question: what was it like playing Marcia? No matter how far she'd come, that fictional perfection haunted her like a shadow that refused to age. Producers still saw her as the same golden-haired teenager frozen in the early 70s. When she tried to branch out, doors closed gently but firmly. Casting directors smiled, said she was wonderful, then called someone else. The industry that once adored her had trapped her inside a memory it wouldn't let die. Determined not to be erased, Maureen fought back. She took roles that challenged her, even when they were small or strange. She tried music, releasing a country album that revealed a raw, vulnerable voice few expected. On stage, away from the TV lights, she felt something she hadn't in years: freedom. But freedom had a price. Fans wanted nostalgia, not truth. Critics compared every move to her past. Even casual encounters could reopen old wounds. "You'll always be Marcia," strangers would say with affection. They meant it kindly, but to Maureen it was a reminder that her real self was still invisible. So she learned to coexist with her alter ego, to stop fighting the ghost and start understanding it. She realized that Marcia wasn't her enemy. She was a part of her story, accepting that truth was the only way to move forward. The world had frozen Maureen in time. Now she was finally learning how to thaw herself out. By the time Maureen McCormick reached her 40s, she was no longer chasing the girl the world wanted her to be. She was chasing the woman she'd buried under decades of guilt, shame, and survival. For the first time, she began speaking her truth, not through a character, but in her own trembling, unapologetic voice. Television welcomed her back, but this time on her terms. Reality shows like Celebrity Fit Club and I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here offered something she hadn't felt in years: authenticity. There were no scripts, no perfect smiles, no rehearsed lines, just Maureen, raw and vulnerable, facing the world without a filter. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about freedom. Viewers were stunned. The same woman who once symbolized perfection now cried on national television, laughed at herself, and admitted to pain most people hide for a lifetime. Her honesty struck a chord. Fans who grew up idolizing her now saw her as human, flawed, brave, and real. She also began reconnecting with her creative roots, performing in theater and returning to music. On stage, under warm lights that didn't demand perfection, she found peace. There was no illusion to maintain, no ghost to outrun. Every lyric, every line, every smile came from a place of healing. And yet, even in her redemption, life still offered unexpected twists. A brief, tender story about her friendship with Michael Jackson reminded people that Maureen's life had never followed a predictable script. Through heartbreak and rebirth, she learned that truth doesn't destroy legacies, it reshapes them. Maureen McCormick was no longer defined by who she was. She was finally proud of who she became. As Maureen McCormick grew older, fame no longer defined her. Forgiveness did. Not the kind written in memoirs or spoken on talk shows, but the silent kind that happens when no one is watching. It began with her family. The same wounds that once drove her to numb the pain slowly became opportunities to heal. She learned to see her parents not as villains of her childhood, but as flawed souls who had their own battles. That shift didn't erase the past, but it finally loosened its grip on her. She also forgave herself for the missed auditions, the broken promises, and the years she spent chasing approval from strangers. For the first time, she could look in the mirror without seeing a cautionary tale. She saw a survivor who chose peace over punishment. In quiet moments, Maureen often said that forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was liberation. It wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about choosing to move forward without carrying the weight of yesterday. That decision became her greatest act of courage. Now, when she smiles, it isn't the practiced grin of a character. It's real, it's weathered, it's earned. The world may always remember Marcia Brady, but Maureen McCormick found something far greater than fame. She found freedom and forgiveness. For most of her life, fame had felt like both a blessing and a cage. It lifted Maureen McCormick higher than she ever dreamed, then dropped her hard enough to break pieces she'd spent decades trying to mend. But as the years passed, she discovered something unexpected. Fame wasn't her enemy. It was a mirror reflecting everything she had to face within herself. In her younger days, fame demanded performance. Now, it asked for presence. Instead of running from the spotlight, Maureen began learning how to stand in it again, on her own terms. She started speaking at recovery events, sharing her story not for attention, but for connection. When she looked out into the crowd and saw people crying, nodding, or smiling with understanding, she realized fame could heal as much as it had once hurt. Social media gave her a new voice too, softer, wiser, unfiltered. Fans no longer saw her as a distant celebrity, but as a friend who'd survived the same storms they were facing. Through honesty and humor, she reclaimed the narrative that others had written for her decades ago. Now, when the spotlight hits her, she doesn't flinch, she doesn't hide, she simply lets it shine. Not on the perfect Marcia Brady, but on the woman who endured everything that came after. Fame no longer defines Maureen McCormick. It dances with her, sometimes gracefully, sometimes awkwardly, but always on her terms. And for the first time, she leads. When the cameras finally stopped chasing her and the noise of fame faded into memory, Maureen McCormick did something she hadn't done in decades. She smiled for herself, not for the audience, not for approval, but because she had survived everything that was meant to destroy her. She learned that fame doesn't heal, it hides, and healing only begins when you stop pretending to be perfect. For Maureen, that meant forgiving the girl who had once been trapped inside a television fantasy, forgiving the child who was forced to grow up too fast, the woman who stumbled too hard, and the survivor who stood back up anyway. Today, she carries both names, Maureen and Marcia, not as a burden, but as proof that identity isn't what Hollywood gives you, it's what you reclaim when the lights go out. Her story isn't about scandal, it's about survival. And maybe that's the lesson every child star, every dreamer, and every broken heart needs to hear. Your past doesn't define you, your comeback does. So the next time you see that famous smile from the Brady Bunch, remember the woman behind it, the one who turned pain into purpose and tragedy into truth. Because here, under the glow of vintage spotlight, we don't just remember the stars, we reveal the stories time tried to hide. If you felt this journey, hit that subscribe button. Stay curious, stay captivated, and never forget, behind every icon lies a story worth remembering.